Welcome to another episode of the Not Another Yoga Class podcast and LinkedIn Live series. Today we have an amazing guest. We have Scott Whitney, the director of All For Inclusion. And today we're going to be talking all about that obstacle, that thing that Scott is struggling with, which in this case is disability and his experience with disability. So, hey, Scott.
How you doing? You okay?
I'm very well, thanks, mate. So tell us a little bit about what it is, what your condition is, or conditions, as we were discussing in advance of this podcast. And then we'll have a little bit of chat about your experience with that, and maybe we can touch on maybe what employers could do better to make sure they are more inclusive, which fits with exactly what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, so I acquired my disability in the summer of 2020, and it happened overnight, really. So I was working at home, 2020 being the year of COVID, and my daughter selfishly wanted her gaming chair back, and I thought that was what was causing some back pain, working on some breakfast bar stools. Took me a while to go to the doctors. As soon as I did, straight into to A&E and MRIs, tests. But as all of this was happening, my health just got further and further worse. It was just going south pretty rapidly. So going from being able to exercise and run a day each day to being able to do not a lot and losing complete ability to do anything with my left leg. These kind of 4 months, I lost the ability to swallow. I had sepsis. I was in hospital with that. Started having seizures, tremors, heart issues. And yeah, I got diagnosed with a condition called FND. I've got a number of disabilities now, but FND being the main one and probably triggers most of them. But FND is like a software issue in your brain. So everything, all the signals that are trying to get input in the brain are just getting scrambled, and it's, my brain has only got so much bandwidth, and it's just shutting down functions of my body.
And you were talking a little bit in advance about a level of fatigue, not only fatigue, but also the inability to sleep or lack of sleep.
Yeah, so especially when you sleep, deep sleep is what you need,
Yeah.
And my body will just tremor, and my brain doesn't like my body going into sleep, so it tries to wake me up through electric shocks, basically. And these can happen generally at significant points in the body. So legs, arms, back, diaphragm being one, which is quite bad, but also the inner part of my tongue as well is now one that happens quite a lot, and that's a really weird sensation. But if you get like 2 or 3 of those that happen in a really, really short space of time, that will then throw my body into a non-epileptic seizure as well. So when it's in a non-epileptic seizure, that can cause different issues, and I can wake up with black eyes or a tooth missing, or lots of different kind of things. So yeah.
Talk to me about what you were experiencing through employment. So you said this started to happen in 2020. It sounds like it was steadily getting worse up until that point, but you were diagnosed in 2020, right? What were you doing, and what were you doing in terms of work?
So I worked as an insurance broker, working full time. My aim was to go back into the office and work normally. I used to go out and visit clients and do business networking outside, but shortly when we got to the new year, there was a business decision made that I would be placed on furlough, and 2 or 3 people on furlough would come back into the business. Had a massive negative effect on my mental health. I fought against that, but that was just a decision of the business. I can't really dispute it. I guess that's down to the powers that be. But then it was when I was sort of coming back into the business, things were starting to get a bit tricky, because everyone had the option of coming back into the business apart from myself, because other people were trying to make decisions to say, hey, you're not fit to come back to work. And I'm going, but I am. And the doctors are going,
it must be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it was. So first of all, I had letters from my doctor saying I was healthy enough. Then I had letters from, multiple medical consultants to say, yeah, I'm fit and healthy enough. And then eventually I got sent to an independent occupational health therapist who went, yeah, he can work. And then when I did come back, because it was decided still that this wasn't right for me to come back, my job role changed completely, because I wasn't trusted to do the same work as I was doing before.
What was it, do you think, about the previous, whether justified or not, what do you think it was about the previous role that they felt was you were no longer capable of doing?
So with the type of business, it's with insurance, you're fighting each year to retain customers. And if you make errors, then, if someone's looking to make a claim on their policy, they can't make a claim on their policy, that could affect their business. It could shut down and affect lots of people's livelihoods. So there was just concerns that I wasn't going to be up to my normal standard, up to my normal pace. And there was nothing to suggest that was going to be the case. And actually, fast forward 4 or 5 years, when it started to become the case, it was me that kind of went, right, look, it's now starting to become a problem. Now we need to talk, and hence why I'm, no longer in employment. And that was a mutual thing, and that was well worked out between myself and the business.
Talk to me about your experience when you went back, and because you're a wheelchair user, right? Tell me about your experience in terms of accessibility and what your employer was doing to make sure things were easier for you, or not doing.
Yeah. So first of all, everything was I was working at home initially, so everything was virtual. But then they wanted me to come into the office, and the business I worked for was as a small independent family business, and like many small insurance brokers, they outsource their compliance, their finance, their HR functions. And the HR function it was outsourced to was saying, if everyone's in the office, so should this guy be in the office. But that wasn't really a concern to me, being in the office, because being in an office is just being in an office, but having no control of some of my bodily functions, and not physically, the doorway was too narrow to be able to get a wheelchair to the bathroom. It was just impossible. But it was pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. So the business didn't have the right infrastructure, the right setup to allow me to return to the office. So that was one thing, which better communication with the HR function would have just resolved that, and probably just kept me working at home.
There seems to be a real gap there, doesn't there? It seems like someone outside that can't see something, there's something invisible to them, is making assumptions about a situation in which they actually don't know the context. And I think the context almost always is the most relevant thing. And context comes from communication. That's how we understand context.
Yeah, so same business, but it got acquired, it got bought out. So with it being bought out, HR function changes because it's no longer being outsourced one way, it's being outsourced another way. And the experience within the workplace then was so much better. But they still wanted me to where possible, go back into the office. But the difference being the other HR function wanted me to go back into the office because that's what the business wanted me to do. The second one wanted me to go back into the office because it was better for me with my mental health to be around different people, more interaction and engagement. But I was going into a different office then. So because another business acquired the business I was working for, I was going back into another one of their businesses, not into the office I worked for. But that still came with its problems. So to get into the building, you would have to go up some steps, and there's a lift, public lift there for wheelchair users to go up. But it wasn't working to start with, so I had to go in the loading bay, which was very unpleasant. It backed onto one of the lanes within Chinatown, and there would be a lot of people using it as a toilet. And when the shutters went up, not only could I smell what was against the wall, it felt like I could taste sometimes what was against the wall as well. So I'll go in through a loading bay and go up the lift and in the office, and the building was one of those buildings where it's lots of businesses in one building, and the company I worked for had a floor, so it wasn't their facility. So the lift was working. They got the front lift working. Now, if you imagine you've got the door from outside to in, and that opens inwards, and the door from the lift opens outwards, they would open onto each other. And because they opened onto each other, if either one of the doors opened on its own, there was enough room for the wheelchair to get between the door and the wall. But when it was designed, there was no consultation with a wheelchair user, obviously. So when the two doors opened together, which they had to do, there was no room for a wheelchair to fit through. So it was ultimately not fit for purpose. So I had to continue to use that loading bay until I finished work.
Was there any other challenge in regards to your wheelchair in that instance? I mean, that's a huge one, right? I can't get into the building.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, the disabled toilets, accessible toilets, they weren't able to be opened from the outside with someone in. Now, if I fall, I need someone to be able to open it and come in. They had no pull cord in the disabled toilet, so if I fell, then I can't alert anyone. So there was a few challenges with that, and the business moved from one floor to another whilst I was in there, and the first thing they did was took me up to the floor. This is what the layout's going to be. And it was, where would you like to be sat? We're not giving everyone the option, but where would you like to be sat? Because no one else has the same challenges as you. So that was something that went really, really well. It was a case of going, right, you're the only one that has a different need. So we want to ensure that your need is met. So whilst there was challenges there, the change of kind of function, the change of HR ownership and operations management, etc., it just made a world of difference as well.
It's far more powerful than businesses hearing you need to be accessible to hear your experience right now, because it becomes tangible, right? I am an employer and I don't have office space yet. But listening to this story, the first thing I'm going to be making sure of is it accessible? Does it have everything that someone using a wheelchair would need? If you could have a blank canvas for these two organizations and you could move it, you were moving into a new office, what would you be saying are the first 3 or 4 things that they need to think about?
So I'm looking at this from a umbrella disability perspective as opposed to Scott in a wheelchair, really. So the first thing I would be considering is noise. So for people who are neurodivergent,
Yeah.
how can you reduce the noise? And is there somewhere for people to go to, deregulate themselves so they're kind of in a situation where they've been triggered in one way or another. Maybe there's been too much noise around them. Maybe it's been a certain call. Maybe they just need 5 minutes just to kind of settle back. So is there like a sensory, a quiet room? And this wouldn't be something for people to go in and play like cards on their lunch break or anything like that. It would be a quiet space. We wouldn't have sort of team meetings or anything like that in there. And that's really important, is to make sure it's used correctly. The next thing I would do is, something that I think is really important, and businesses don't tend to get this right because of a lack of trust by employees, really, is they don't know how many people they are that are disabled within their business, and then they don't know who those people are. So if you don't know everyone that's disabled within your business, because obviously there's so many hidden disabilities, how are you going to be able to engage with people? And everyone who's disabled is different, like everyone who's non-disabled is different. So the second thing I would be looking at doing is going, right, I need to engage with the people that are already within my business, because if I'm making it right for them, there's a good chance I'm going to be making it better for anyone that's new, that's coming into the business as well. But to do that, you need to know who in your business is disabled, who's willing to come in and give you tips and advice. And a lot of employees will be thinking, hey, look, if I'm going to tell you about my disability, is that going to work against me in the long run?
Yeah.
But if you're a business owner, surely you're thinking, right, I've got a set of employees and I've got 10%, 5%, 20%, which is probably closer to the number, of employees that are only working at 60, 70% of their ability. Surely you want to get them working as close to 100% of their ability as possible. And that's by getting reasonable adjustments in there. Reasonable adjustment could be something just as simple as, getting your stationery right. So I would be making sure I'm engaging with the staff to be able to get the office space correct. And I would be really.
I want to jump in here, mate, before you give us your next point, because I think you've made a brilliant one, and we did a seminar on neurodivergence end of last month, and the thing that came away from it, from the amazing guests we have, was create a culture in which people are willing to volunteer information about themselves. So what you've nailed a point there, which is, how much do I want to divulge to my employer? How comfortable do I feel divulging information about myself to my employer? If they're in an environment and a culture where they do feel comfortable, then you, as an employer, you're in an amazing situation where you can ask them, what do you need? It doesn't need to be, what is your label? What is your thing? Do you have ADHD? You know, do you have a disability? It doesn't need to be any of that. It can just be, what do you need? And then once you find that out, as you said, you can start to create this environment where people have what they need, and you might end up having a bit of crossover.
Yeah. So, most kind of like disability aids, or a lot of technology starts off as a disability aid. So if you take the electric toothbrush as an example, well, the electric toothbrush was invented to help people with cognitive or kind of difficulties brushing their own teeth. You look at a lot of the technology in things like your AI bits in and around the house, so like your Series and things like that. And a lot of that technology starts off helping disabled people. So it just it shouldn't be about limiting it to disabled people. So you've got someone who's got ADHD or who's autistic, and they want to wear noise cancelling headphones during periods of the day. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who's non-disabled can't wear noise cancelling headphones during the day, because during certain tasks they struggle to concentrate. Yeah, still let them do it. It doesn't. It shouldn't be about, like you said, the label. It should be about how can we get the best out of our employees. And getting the best out of our employees isn't about kind of, straining every last bit of energy and resource from them. It's building loyalty and things like that as well.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And to that point there, I think you've nailed something else. I mean, there is no two. What is it, the saying that I was told recently? It's something like, once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. The point being that all of us are different. And your point there was perfect, right? I know people with ADHD that benefit from noise cancelling headphones. I have ADHD. I benefit from pumping heavy metal into my ears when I have a task to do, because it stops anything else becoming a distraction, right? So we're all different, and ultimately, I think at the very core of this is communication and creating an environment where people feel safe enough to be able to divulge the things that they need. And I think that's a really nice kind of place for us to end the conversation on. What I would love to hear about, though, is All for Inclusion. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, so All for Inclusion started 3 years ago when I wanted to be able to give back in some way to the disability community. Didn't know exactly what it was to start with, and I felt like initially the best place was to educate businesses. But actually, there's lots of good people out there already educating businesses, and yeah, I'm good at educating businesses, I believe, as well. So I can do that, and we do that. But actually, I want to do something a bit more unique, a bit different. So a lot of disabled people, it's something like 3 or 4 times more likely to be suffer with chronic loneliness. So as a result, it's a case of creating spaces, communities, environments where they're getting removed from social isolation. Now, people can be lonely in a crowded room, and people can feel not lonely whilst they're on their own. So it's not just about putting people in a room. We started off with just doing weekly chats. We now do art groups, photography groups, book clubs, writing clubs, bingo, quiz nights. We put on webinars. We look after and do sessions for carers as well, because it's, they're a huge part of the disability community. One of the carers that comes weekly to the carers group, he's got a non-verbal autistic child. When I say child, it's a child to him, but he's not of a children's age. I'm not sure how old he is, but he's 20 plus. I think he might be in his 30s, but and they, carers face different challenges, so they still need a space to be able to talk, to share problems, to vent, and it's bringing people together. It's giving people a place to ask a question. So I'm having a catheter fitted. What should I expect? How should it feel? I've lost some weight. This is awesome. I'm really, really pleased. But this person who might have lost weight and is now getting celebrated by 20 other people previously would have lost his weight and would have wanted to celebrate it with someone, and there was no one to celebrate it with. Celebrating birthdays is a big thing. Again, some people who might not have had a happy birthday wish for 5 or 6 years to them on their birthday now getting like 20, 25 birthday wishes. And there are times when people can kind of get a bit overwhelmed and a bit teary because it's they're so wish the space was available before. And yeah, I guess in a perfect world, I would have found out before I became disabled myself that this space was needed.
Well, hopefully we can spread the word a little bit more, mate. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to link All for Inclusion's website into pretty much everything that we use to promote this. So thank you so much for coming on.
Awesome. No, thanks for having me.